Well, today we're going to explore a heavy topic, but there's a lot of humor involved. And that's one of the things I appreciate about Lucas Wilson, who is my guest today. He is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, I think is how you say that. He's the editor of the book that we're going to talk about in this episode, Shame, Sex, Attraction, Survivors' Stories of Conversion Therapy. He's also the author of a book called At Home with the Holocaust. This is someone who lives in academia, but is super fun and engaging, and listening to him tell stories is fascinating. So again, we go to some really heavy topics and things that I think we need to spend time processing, but thankfully Lucas helps us to do it in a way that is engaging and fun. So this is episode 51, Shame, Sex, Attraction.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly. There's so many things happening in this conversation right now. 1,000 years from now, people are going to be looking at this podcast saying, so this was the breakthrough.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I've been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on the show.
I will also say as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table, we're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thank you for the hospitality that this particular podcast provides folks like myself, and I know others, to be curious around their faith practices.
I really appreciate this venue, what you're doing. It is fun, and yet you dig into the deep stuff.
I've heard about your podcast for a long time, and I love that you're a pastor and that you explore the world of faith through wine. That's very unique.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So I
got a little spicy there. It's the peach wine.
Apparently the wine is, here we are. Queer we are. Beer we are. No, it's wine, Jeremy.
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
I know why you have your guests drink wine. It makes sense now. Yeah, I get it. A little bit of liquid courage to really unleash the beast.
I think you've got a good podcast. So throw in the wine bit in there. That's nice, doesn't it? Cabernet and Pray, yeah.
All right, welcome to the podcast, Lucas.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeremy. It's very exciting to be here.
This is going to be an exciting conversation, but as you guys know, before we dive in, we got to talk about what's in our glasses today. I have a French wine today that I cannot pronounce. So my rule of thumb is you just act confident when you pronounce this. So today I'm drinking a Chateau de la Houste Fronsac. I don't really know how you say this, but that's what I'm rocking today. This is a Bordeaux blend, primarily Merlot, 95%, a little bit of Cab Franc in there. This is estate bottled, which means it's grown, harvested, bottled, all on site, which is kind of cool. They still do this. The color of these, as you'd expect from a Bordeaux wine, is super dark, deep ruby, almost black cherry in the glass. And I love when you go old world wines, you get a lot of that minerality in it. You get a Bordeaux earth. This is like pencil shavings and damp gravel. And so you get a little bit of earthiness in there. Because it's Merlot, it's medium to full body, so not necessarily as big as you might expect. Those are usually more of the Cabernets that have that. But this one's got cherry, plum, subtle little tobacco, and some cedar in it. And it's actually, it's warm where I'm at, but it's a very nice afternoon wine. I'm enjoying it. So Lucas, that's what I've got. You're going to come at this a different angle, and I'm excited for it. So what do you got?
Like a completely different angle, particularly because the all of the writing on this wine is in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish.
Okay,
and so what I can gather from this reservoir, oh God, listen to this. This is just pathetic. De la Familia. It's a Chardonnay. And I can gather that it's from Uruguay, because Uruguay is spelled the same way in English as it is in Spanish. So we got that. And I haven't taken a sip yet. And so I don't know what this tastes like. And again, I said before, I'm not a classy gal, but here we are with my my non-wine glass. I don't know what kind of glass this is, but here we are. I mean, it smells like white wine. It probably tastes like white wine. Let's go for it. Yep. Exactly as I thought, white wine. I have no idea how to, navigate these waters when it comes to alcohol, in general, but wine more specifically. Maybe beer I can do a little bit better of a job, but dear Lord, I am starting off real strong here, huh? In this.
So Lucas, it comes down to this: there are wines you like, and there are wines you don't like, and everything else is icing on the cake. So, do you like that wine? Yes or no? That's all you really got to answer.
Yes. Unlike, a lot of the hearings that we've been watching on social media and elsewhere online recently where, it's a yes or no answer and they just say more than yes or no, which I've just done, I will say yes. Yes, I like it.
Then great. Cheers to you. You've got a glass of something you enjoy. We have our wine ready. We are ready for a great conversation. Now we're going to talk about conversion therapy, which is something admittedly for straight people. We don't either fully understand what it is, certainly probably don't have a ton of experience with it. And so it's one of those, I think a lot of people may go, okay, I've heard of that. I may be somewhat aware of it, but I think it'd be helpful as we begin. How would you describe what conversion therapy is and maybe its stated goals of like, how is it presented to people so that we have that as a frame of reference?
Yeah, so at its core, conversion therapy are efforts to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression. So really, it's trying to align queer people with the heteronormative model. And typically these days, when we're talking about conversion therapy or more broadly conversion practices, we're thinking really in the Christian context. Not to say that it's only in the Christian context. It's certainly not exclusive to conservative Christian traditions, but it happens disproportionately within these communities. Sort of surprisingly, I guess, for some people, conversion therapy didn't originate in religious context. It actually originated in secular context, particularly in medical and psychiatric context. But once we hit the 70s, it became much more of a Christian phenomenon and picked up speed into the 80s and into the 90s at the height of the ex-gay movement, and then into the 2000s and, to where we are now. It's 100%. That's a misleading percentage. It's very much a Christian phenomenon today. It's not 100%, but again, the vast majority of conversion practices are going to be occurring within high control religious context, particularly conservative Christian contexts.
Yeah, and just to give my context where I first intersected this conversation, when I became a lead pastor in a church in Oregon, like within my first month, I had this lady that was in the church and wanted to meet with me. And I mean, like, wanted to meet with me, like kept emailing, kept calling my assistant, like, I got to get on his calendar. And I'm like in the first month thinking, what on earth could be that important? I'm trying to wrap my hands around all these different things. What is this pressing issue that she's got to meet with me about? And so she gets on my calendar the first month or two, and I sat down with her. And I have no idea what we're talking about, And I'm like, what? Something is very important to you. And she goes, I need to know your stance on homosexuality. And I was a little caught off guard, just like, why? Like, why do you need to know my stance on this? And why is this such a pressing concern? And so I just started asking a little bit more like follow up, like, okay, why is this a passion for you? And what's your involvement? Well, I find out she leads a conversion therapy ministry and has been very involved in this. And so I quickly realized, I'm about to make an enemy here of someone that has been in the church that I don't resonate with this at all. And so I'm trying not to make enemies in month one. That would come in the years to come. And so I just say to her, yeah, that's not my thing. And I don't do that. And I don't have experience doing that. And I don't think there's merit. Just as kindly as I could say, I'm not going to do this. And she just immediately turned on me and was like, you must be the devil if you don't believe in this. And then, immediately like went on Facebook and lit me up. And I just was like, wow, this like you were saying, this has become a Christian thing for a lot of people. And that's how she saw her ministry. And so I just think for people listening to this, you may not have direct experience with it, but what this book does so well is, especially for someone like me, who this is not my story, gives me a chance to listen and just hear the pain and the journey that you have gone through and so many other people. And as I'm listening to all these stories, I mean, I could only read so much of this in one sitting because it's just like a heavy weight if you have any empathy in you at all when you're just hearing these stories. So I was curious, why now? Like, what led to, hey, let's get all these stories together? It was a timing right? Did something kind of coalesce for that? What led to the creation of this book and all these different stories together?
Yeah. So, I mean, first, just hearing your experience with that congregant, or maybe not, not for long.
She wasn't for long.
Yeah, she got the heck out of there. So, I mean, hearing that, I mean, like, so often, particularly, I shouldn't even say particularly right now, like, this has been something, especially from the 90s onwards, but before in the 80s and the 70s, your stance on homosexuality became this litmus test for whether or not you're a true believer, whether or not you're, you know, of God or of the enemy. And so it's oftentimes elevated, right, to a level of sinfulness that is over and above any other sin, maybe on par with like pedophilia and bestiality, but even then, like, the jury's still out, according to these folks. And so it's like, I think that what that says to us is just, again, like, how demonized queer people are within the church, right? Like, how their quote unquote sin is seen as worse than any other sin. And again, it's this litmus test, right? It really serves as a clear sort of expression for so many people. Again, I think it's a lot more complicated than that, but, you know, for so many people, whether or not you are, you know, of the fold or outside of it. And so that's just what comes to mind when you were saying what you're saying and telling that story. But as to why this collection came about, it was actually a DM on Twitter, when Twitter was still called Twitter. I got this message from this editor at this press, and, you know, when I first received it, I thought, like, this is some sort of scam. Like, this isn't real. Like, no one's reaching out to me on Twitter to you know, write a book or to collect stories. You know, that's it. And it felt like, so I quickly did, you know, a quick Google and found out, sure enough, this is a real, you know, editor at a real press. Because, you know, there's so many, like, what's the word, like, predatory publishing opportunities, quote unquote, that people reach out to you, like, hey, do you want to pay like $10,000? You're like, absolutely not. Like, no, I'm not paying to have my book published. But again, some people sort of tried this. So turns out it was real, and back and forth between me and the editor for a few, I don't know, like, weeks, just negotiating what exactly we were looking for. And I really wanted to have only survivors' voices in here, no, you know, fictional accounts. And as of recent, we've seen some, you know, fictional accounts from folks, you know, who weren't survivors writing about conversion therapy, and also even just like documentaries and, you know, representations of conversion practices that have been focusing not necessarily just on survivors, but also on the perpetrators, those who are, you know, practicing conversion therapy. And so I wanted to make sure that we would only include survivors' voices, to center those voices and to put those first. And so all of the contributors in the collection are survivors. There are 17 of us. My story is included at the very end, but then there's also Garrett Conley, author of Boy Erased, and, you know, the film's based on that memoir, if you've seen it, and he wrote the foreword. So all of us are survivors. But as to why, like, you know, right now, to be honest, it was an opportunity at the time, like that. It was just presented to me, and, you know, obviously I wasn't going to say no. It was super exciting, and, you know, I felt honored that the editor at that point had said that they had been tracking my work on my public facing work about conversion therapy, and like op-eds in mostly queer publications, but also a few religious, you know, oriented publications as well. And so when they asked, "Would you want to do this?" Of course I said yeah. But I think that it's sort of serendipitous, or, you know, maybe if to draw upon my evangelical sort of lexicon, a God thing from days of old, that right now that this collection came out, because of course recently, you know, there was the Supreme Court made the decision that they will hear a case about conversion therapy later this year or early next year. That, you know, the news came out, you know, like a month ago or a few weeks ago or whatever. And so it feels like it's a timely thing, in the sense that there will be a decision made by the highest court in the US as to whether or not conversion practices will be legal. And it's a very, like, how do I put it in like the best academic terms I can, like, stupid way of approaching this case, that the person who's, you know, suing is saying that they want to be able to exercise free speech. And that's why they should be able to practice conversion therapy. And you're like, dear Lord, like, what are you talking about? Like, any professional code of conduct does not make sort of caveats for your free speech. Like, if your free speech impinges upon or interferes negatively with clients or patients, then obviously your free speech is like not a thing. That's not what matters. What matters is the practices that you're performing. The problem is, of course, that even though that is, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, like a very stupid approach, right now with the way that the Supreme Court is stacked, it's not looking good. So at the end of the day, I want to say, like, this collection is going to change minds, and it's going to go out there, and people are going to it's going to make a difference in that sense. That's idealistic. I would like to be realistic, and I don't think that that's the case. I think, though, that it will at least raise awareness about conversion therapy. It will raise awareness about the effects of conversion therapy, and also just giving survivors of some representation. And so, again, I would love to say that this is going to change the Supreme Court's decision. I don't think that's going to happen. But nonetheless, I do think it is coming out at a coincidental time, or a time that seems like, kind of perfect. But at the same time, just given the reality of what the Supreme Court's makeup is, I don't know what the effect of it will be.
Sure. And I would say for anyone listening to this, I think we're as I was reading this book, where I was thinking, okay, who would I want to read this, and who would I think like this would be a great fit? It really would be for someone I think would be powerful if you're on, and I meet these people all the time. I have this conversation all the time. People who are open to maybe changing their mind on the whole affirming conversation, but they're not there yet. And they're not there yet either logically, or they can't reconcile the way they read the Bible with that. And, so they're still working through that. And I have these conversations a lot. And I think part of it is it's easy to kind of separate that as like, well, maybe I'll get around to it. Maybe, because if you're straight, this is not in your face. You have to fix this, right? What happens when you read this book, though, is it stirs something in you where you go, oh, gosh, this is a problem. And the way in which we are believing this is completely dehumanizing / traumatizing / fill in whatever word you want to use. And you get a whole bunch of them after reading these stories, where then it creates that sense of like, maybe I need to really rethink this a little bit. And that's, I think, the power of the stories in this collection. You say that the book isn't a how-to manual, but it's a survival story. And so I'm curious, for those who are new to your story, what did surviving look like for you?
Yeah. So I wasn't even raised in the church. I became a Christian in high school and became sort of like a zealot at the time. And then, in my sort of like excitement as a young evangelical, I decided that I wanted to go to the world's largest evangelical university, which of course is Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia,
which is so
founded by the one.
That's a funny reality that's your school.
Oh my God. Looking back, like, I just think to myself, like, what was life like? I always say now, like, we make decisions and they're not always good, right? And so, for anyone who's not familiar, it's Jerry Falwell's school, right? And then later on, when Jerry died, Jerry Jr. took over, and then Jerry Jr. was pushed out once, or stepped down, as if there was any like choice in the matter. Once folks found out that him, his wife, and a Miami pool boy were having a three-way cuckolding relationship. It was kind of hilarious. By kind of, I mean like just absolutely amazing. And so that, to give again a little bit of context. And so it's, Trump has 2 honorary doctorates, Mike Pence has an honorary doctorate, like Candace Owens is a regular there, like this kind of stuff. Charlie Kirk was formerly affiliated with the school. Anywho, so for me, I made the really wise decision. And looking back, it's so wild, right? Because I could have gone to Canada's best university. I'm from Toronto, and I was planning on either going to University of Toronto, again, like a really good school, and Liberty, and I chose Liberty. So yeah, my CV is there's a big stain on it, and I won't say what it is, but I think you could do the math. So yeah, so I went to Liberty, and it was there that, it was like, for me, because I wasn't raised in the church, I always had one foot in, one foot out. And I mean, I was in it to win it. Like, I was definitely, full steam ahead, like for Jesus, sort of again, like, on fire for God. But I also had like, I wasn't like strange or like weird or socially awkward like so many of my Christian friends. I wasn't homeschooled. I didn't go to a Christian, elementary, middle, or high school. I could hold a conversation. It was, I think novel for a lot of them. And so I think that for me, like, when my big idea was to go to Liberty, I knew that they had a conversion therapy program, though I didn't conceptualize it as such. Like I didn't think like, oh, they have a conversion therapy program in those terms. I instead thought about it because it was advertised as a pastor on campus who was a paid university staff member who helped two groups of guys. One, the group who was addicted to porn, and as research suggests, you cannot be addicted to porn, but putting that aside for now. And then the other group, those who were addicted to homosexuality. And I was like, guilty as charged. And so I thought, like, well, I'm going to go there because I know that they can help me and they can fix me. They can cure me of this, affliction, this struggle that I had. And so that really was a big motivating factor for why I went to Liberty. And so I went down as a 18-year-old. And my big idea, again, this goes back to the idea of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. My big idea was that, so in high school, of course, I went to a public arts high school. The writing was on the wall. Like everyone should have known, who Luke Wilson was. But I went to this school and I always thought, I didn't want to have a bad witness for Jesus. I didn't want to, sort of like give off bad PR if I'm out there, going on dates with, unsaved guys. And especially if they're guys, right? Of course, within the evangelical imagination, you can't be gay and Christian, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, I have to sort of be, a good kid. Well, I thought to myself, when I get to Liberty, like they're all Christian. Like I can go down there and go and like date Christian guys. No one's going to tell on me because they're just as guilty as I am. And then at the end of my time at Liberty, I'll go and switch, become straight and off. I'll go and, with some woman. Again, at the time, it didn't matter who, as long as it was a woman. And then I'd go back to Canada and, everything would be fine. And that plan really didn't, well, for a number of reasons.
Didn't play out for you?
Believe it or not. And so I get down to Liberty, and my spirit, on every dorm at Liberty, there were 2 RAs, under them 2 spiritual life directors, under them a bunch of prayer leaders, and under them the rest of us like plebeians who weren't spiritual enough, to be on leadership. And for me, I wasn't on leadership until I was in like my junior year. So I get there, and there's this one spiritual life director on my hall who takes a very keen interest in me, and starts flirting and whatever. And I had never flirted in my life. Like I was 18 years old and like thinking like, what is this what I think it is? Like, I don't really know. So it's super confusing. This guy starts making moves. Anyway, we had this absolutely bizarre, like romantic encounter, if we can be so generous with the term romantic. And afterwards, he wouldn't talk to me. Like he was like so awash in his like, evangelical guilt or I guess shame, maybe both. And he was just like sort of like excommunicated me. And the problem was we lived on the same dorm. We were, at Liberty, a lot of things are structured in such a way that you and your dorm do a lot of things together, whether that be chapel, which they call convocation 3 times a week, or, hall meetings on Tuesday nights, or, whatever, like people go to the cafeteria together, that kind of thing. And so I was like, well, shoot, like I want to talk to this guy, like something happened. And so I remember I said to him, I texted him, I said, hey, we should probably talk about what happened. And he said, nothing happened. And I was like, oh, shoot, like, that's not true. Like, anyway, so I couldn't do anything. So I would just go and cry in the parking lot all the time. I was like, just devastated, right? And eventually, like every, good angsty teen, particularly of the queer variety, I wrote a poem about what happened. And it was called, You Ever Notice How Cold It Gets in the Fall? Which is just like terrible, right? Like unbelievably cringe. But I write this poem.
Do you still remember this poem? I
still have this poem. You know what?
Can we get like a line from
Jeremy?
it?
I've never read this, and I've told the story, a few times. No one's asked me to read this, but here we are. Let's see if I can.
Oh yes, this is what we get on Cabernet and Pray, friends. He is currently looking it up on his computer.
It's on October 20. Last time I opened this was on October 24th, 2019. So this was 6 years ago. Oh gosh. Should I read it? Should I read the first stanza? How about that? Because I don't want to.
Yeah, let's get the first stanza, just so we can really appreciate the story.
Oh my god, I'm like like the awkward shivers that like kind of sort of like paralyze your neck. I'm reading like, oh, the word inane's in here. Like, the moment the words and the word inane is in your poem, you're like, you've done, you've not done the job. Okay. You ever notice how cold it gets in the fall? You ever notice how cold it gets in the fall? No, I know it may sound inane, but when the weather is so bitter, as pain is imparted and your lips begin to quiver, it's fall. When we walk down the red hall and step out the door, I realize it's not so warm outside anymore. You ever notice how cold it gets in the fall?
Yes. I'm here for
sweating.
all of it.
Oh gosh, I'm sweating. dear Lord.
You know what? If academia isn't your thing anymore, poetry, bro. Poetry.
I've got a
I
back
love
door. Well, that sounds like anyway, never mind. So on that note, so I write this poem again, as you know, beautiful as it was. I write this poem, and I had a
poem
friend.
For him, or was it for you?
Well, this was for me to get it out of my system. Like,
okay.
But again, it certainly didn't work, as the story will soon reveal. Because again, like I had no one on campus. Imagine this, right? You're at a campus where you can't tell anyone what just happened, because if you do, it's not street cred to be gay at Liberty University. But on top of that, like it's like there's always the threat that you can be kicked out for doing what I did. And so I was terrified, and I wasn't like telling. No one back home knew that no one back home knew explicitly that I was gay. At least I didn't say I was. But again, I watched a lot of HGTV growing up, so again, I think that people had an inkling.
Had an idea.
Yeah, somewhat, if not completely. So I was I was sort of like, I would go to the parking lot, cry, pray, and then call my mom without telling her what happened or that I was upset, and then I'd go on with my evening. And this was pretty much like every evening that I could do it. So what I eventually did was that I was at work one time, and I was a switchboard operator. So anytime you called the university and press 0, you'd get me when I was working. And so it was great because half the time no one's calling the university, so I would just sit there and do homework. But I was also allowed to have friends over. So I had a friend, Michael, one time, and I use his name because he's given me the green light. So one time we were at my work and we're just chatting and doing homework and chatting, whatever. And he knew that something had happened between me and my spiritual life director, but I didn't tell him what. And he was like, "Well, come on, tell me what happened." I was like, "Well, no, I can't tell you what happened." He said, "Well, why?" I said, "Michael, if I tell you, you're not going to want to be my friend." And he's like, "Well, what the hell does that?" Or what the heck? He wouldn't have said hell. What the heck does that mean? I said, "Well, I can't explain it, but I did write a poem." So I said, can I read that poem to you? And he said, sure. So I read Michael this poem, and I love it because to this day, well, I shouldn't say to this day, I saw Michael last year, we Zoomed, but to this day, quote unquote, Michael, whenever we would talk about anything that even had like the slightest valence of sexuality, his lips would quiver. The reason why I noticed it was my grandma's lips used to always quiver, not about anything sexual. I never talked anything about, along those lines, but she used to have these like sort of like shaky lips. And so Michael, I noticed he had these like shaky lips, and I was like, oh shoot, like something's going on inside of Michael right now. He's responding. But so I read in the poem, and he says, with these shaky lips, he says, I think I know what the poem's about. And I was like, oh shoot, like my cover's been blown. And so I said, well, what do you think the poem's about? He said, well, I don't want to guess and be wrong. I said, well, why wouldn't you want to guess and be wrong? He's like, because if I guess and I'm wrong, you'll know about my struggle. I said, wait a second. And for me, like as a young gay kid in the church, whenever anyone said struggle, like that was often reserved for when you're talking about like struggling with same-sex attraction. So I was like, wait a second. So we sort of like started fumbling back and forth, like testing the waters. And eventually we're both like, oh, I struggle with same-sex attraction. Oh, I struggle with same-sex attraction. And then, we both find out that we're both young queers. And so we, again, like we didn't really talk, we talked about this every time we'd hang out, and it was great in the sense that I finally had someone I could talk to and share my poem with, apparently. But on top of that, I was, I thought to myself, well, I don't really want to burden Michael with all of this sort of like emotional weight that I'm, carrying and like constantly like put this on him. So I said, well, I might as well fast track that idea that I had of going to conversion therapy. So that's when I eventually reached out to the conversion therapist on campus. His name is Pastor Dane Emmerich. And I reached out to him, and I was like, but I was nervous he was going to find out who I was and then get me in trouble before I even went to him. So I was like, let me make a fake email with like an identity or a persona that says like different from who I was. It's like 18-year-old gay Luke from Toronto. I was like, so I made the email was something along the lines of like Texas football fan or something stupid like that, right? So
Super
I emailed him.
Straight guy.
Yeah, me, throwing those pigskins around. And so I email him, and I'm like, hey, if I come talk to you, will I get in trouble? He said, unless you're going to self-harm, I suppose in a physical way, nothing you say will leave my office. So I was like, okay. So I went, and that's how I eventually went to meet with him. And so that was really quickly into my freshman year. And then it was over the 4 years that I was at Liberty that I was in this program. I only went once to the group conversion therapy program that Liberty had. And that's what I write about in the book and the story that's included. And so I'm saving the one-on-one story for my next edited collection. But yeah, it was over the 4 years of my time at Liberty doing my undergrad. again, if we can be so generous with the term like undergrad, when we associate it with Liberty University, you can just guess the quality of education I received. But yeah, that's how it came about. That's how I got into it.
Wow. I just want to keep asking you to tell stories. This is exciting. Okay, there's a few quotes I want to read from the book that you get into some ideas that are really powerful that I think probably a lot of people don't necessarily connect the dots the way you do it. And then it's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, for example, it says, the stories included in this collection offer a range of conversion experiences, and what unites them all is the effects of shame. Without shame, the authors in this collection would never have felt compelled to submit themselves to conversion practices. And so really, that is obviously something weaved throughout each of the chapters. How did the theological environment you grew up in, or you came later to it, how did all that shape your idea of shame around your sexuality?
Mm-hmm. So I think to zoom out before we zoom in on my experience, and particularly in regards to my sexuality, I think about Christian theology as a shame-laden ideology, right? Like this is something that consistently tells believers that who they are is evil. Like if we're calling a spade, right? That it's evil, that it's wrong, that you're sinful, that you as yourself, even your righteousness or your good deeds, or the good parts of you, those are filthy rags according to God. Like in God's eyes, they're equivalent to tampons, right? Like use tampons if we're using a modern day sort of like equivalent. That's wild, right? Like I think that. So we don't really sort of recognize, or at least I didn't recognize for a long time, how imbued into the very fabric of this theology, of Christian theology, that you have to believe. Again, I'm going to say with conservative Christian context, I think that there actually are a number of hermeneutic or sort of interpretive possibilities that sort of circumnavigate this sort of phenomenon that I'm naming. But let's talk about specifically conservative Christian traditions. Evangelicalism, Pentecostalism, white Christian fundamentalism, whatever. So within this these religious traditions, you have to believe that's sort of why Jesus matters, is that you're not good enough. You are not sufficient. You're on your own, and you need a savior. Why? Because you need saving because of your sinfulness, right? You are not good at your core. And so that right away lays the foundation, lays the groundwork for why people in Christianity, or Christians, should I say, why they struggle, I think, so often with shame. This is not exclusive simply to queers within Christianity. It extends beyond that to straights as well. I mean, think about for any of us who, gay or straight, when we were in high school, every time we looked at porn, it was the world was ending, and we just thought oh God, what have I done again? And it's yeah, my body has natural urges, crazy. And so, this was something that, I think that affected all of us, so many of us. I still remember, this is actually a funny little side note. There was a gal that I was pursuing very unsuccessfully, but she liked me somehow, and I liked her in a platonic sense, and I was I really like her, and it was nothing more, but I really tried to push that and make it into something more than it was. So I remember I went and visited her. She lived in London, Ontario, and I was living in Virginia, but I would come up I surprised her over, I think it was American Thanksgiving break, and so I surprised her, and we I'm at this coffee shop, I turn around, I'm there, and she's oh my gosh, it's you, and all excited, chatting, whatever. And she was grabbing onto me and holding my hand. And I still remember when she grabbed onto me, that feeling, I was I don't like this. And then when she's holding my hand, thinking I really don't like that either. It's so intimate. And so it was just imagine anyone that you just don't want to touch you, who you're not attracted to, even though you're trying to, it's not a fun experience. And so eventually I told her, I said, Courtney, I think we need to pump the brakes here. Not that I don't want to date you. I think we're moving too fast. We had literally held hands. And so this sort of goes back and forth. I come back to Virginia, and then there's sort of I come back to Canada, and we're negotiating all this. Anyway, long story short, fast forward to next summer, I went and visited her again, and I said, okay, before I come, I want you to pray. I really want you to, prepare yourself in your heart for what I'm about to tell you, because I don't want, I want you to take this seriously. I'm taking this seriously, and I want you to know something about me that I just haven't told you yet. So obviously it was the fact that I was gay. So, or I said that I struggled with same-sex attraction. I was under the delusion with very little evidence that I was bisexual. There was nothing to back up that belief other than perhaps the gay part. So or the attraction to men. So we prepare, she's preparing her heart, I'm preparing mine, whatever, blah, blah, blah. We go to this park so that, we're not by her family or whatever. And I said, like, I need to tell you something. I said, I'm bisexual. I'm attracted to men. And she goes, oh, I've been, thinking, like, what could this possibly be? And I'm just sort of like freaking out, in anticipation. But she said, eventually she's like, well, I have something to tell you too. And I'm like, oh, like, did I just win the jackpot here for like an ex-gay Christian? Like, did I find a lesbian? No. What I found was that she then confessed to me, she's like, well, I look at porn sometimes. I love it. Yeah, I love it, right? Like, yeah, that's the same thing, right? So let's move forward. Cool. But that was it. It was just like the best. I to this day, I think that's just one of the funniest, like, yeah, in her sort of like, teenage mind or whatever. Yeah, I guess she would have been a teenager, that was, on par. Anywho, so shame is certainly something that, underlays Christian theology writ large. But then when we're thinking specifically in regards to sexuality and gender, if your gender is in any way non-normative, and how you express it or how you identify, I think that for us, queers, and I use queer in both the gender and sexual sense just to be, all-encompassing and make it easier to talk about. But for queers within evangelical traditions or, high-control Christian traditions, it's absolutely a source of shame. And it again, like I said in the intro of the book, it's what brings queers into conversion therapy, but it's also, according to a recent Canadian study, the number one consequence of conversion practices. So it's both the sort of thing that attracts, folks in, but it also is that which is compounded. And again, the number one sort of like fruit, pun I guess intended, of conversion therapy, right? So I think that, shame is such a central, that's obviously why the name of the book is Shame, Sex, Attraction. It's such an integral part for conversion practices, because if we put aside the folks who are forced into it, and there are, of course, a number of folks who are forced into conversion therapy, but if we put those folks aside, for the rest of us who quote unquote chose to go into it, we can talk more about agency and what it means to choose, which I think is a lot more complicated than I think some folks try to make it seem. That I think that what we see is that, again, why would we be there if it were not for the fact that we thought of ourselves as a problem that needs to be fixed, that we are, something that is dirty, defective, damaged, incomplete, whatever. And I think that conversion therapy is such a dirty business because it preys upon, or it relies upon, really, right, shame as an integral sort of factor in one's, lived experience, for them to come into this quote unquote therapy. And of course it's not therapy, it's a misnomer. I mean, there's also no conversion involved either. No one's ever changed. But I think that, yeah, it's wild when you take that step back and when you're not within conversion practices or conversion therapy to see it for what it is. And it's just this shame amplifying and also shame, like hungry, it's a set of practices that is, again, it's predicated upon shame and it amplifies shame. And so that's how shame comes into this conversation. And again, and more broadly in Christian theology.
Now, I would say there's like a 1-2 punch there, shame being one punch. Then one of the things I noticed come up in a lot of the different chapters was the threat of hell being used. And so it's this idea, often by the person practicing the conversion therapy or the representative of that, if you don't do this right, if you don't take this seriously enough, if you don't try hard enough, that's what's waiting for you. And so shame might get you in the door, but then it seemed like in a lot of the stories as I was reading it, this very literal eternal conscious torment view of hell is now going to be the thing that's going to take over for shame. And now we're just going to literally scare you to death and get you to do all this. And we're talking about a lot of things I've changed my mind in over the years. So I was not raised to be affirming. I got there after changing my mind. I also was raised with the eternal conscious torment view of hell and have changed my mind on that as well. And so now I envision, like, a question I had as I was reading these stories. If you could remove the eternal conscious torment view of hell, hypothetically, right? If you could remove that from all of these stories and that could not be used, how would that change, do you think, these stories when, if we started, because this is one of the things, not necessarily in this subject, but I talk about hell a lot because I think it's one of the worst things in Christian theology that people think they understand the Orthodox view, and it's really not Orthodox and doesn't look anything like Jesus. So if we could get people to remove that, do you think that would be instrumental in changing some of these stories, or is it just like they would find something else?
I think that the vast majority of the contributors specifically, but also folks who subject themselves to conversion practices in general, and those who are pushed to subject themselves. Like, I think that without the threat of hell, and it is a threat, right? It's this ever-present, like, you are going to burn forever threat, and it completely separates you from God, which I think is actually the lesser of the two threats, to be honest. That without that, people wouldn't do this. Because again, the incentive for people to go into this, if we're talking in the Christian context specifically, the two big sort of like reasons why people go in are that they're not going to be able to be in relationship with God or right relationship with God, because of course within these religious traditions, it's believed that either you choose yourself, i.e. your sexuality, or you choose God as if it's some sort of choice, right? And so it's this false dichotomy that's set up for them that you have one or the other, you can't have both. And so if that's the case, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but for those who come from this context, like that seems to them to be the obvious choice. Well, of course I would choose God over me because, I'm sinful, I'm dirty, I'm all these things, right? The self-confidence is at an all-time high when you're an evangelical, right? But I think that, that's the first thing. But then like I said, a second ago, I think the even more important really thing is that if you don't, then you're going to go to hell. Because again, if you've chosen that you're not going to be in right relationship with God, well, what's the consequence of that? Of course, hell. And so it's this incredibly effective and also affective, and affect in the sense of like emotional pull to bring people into conversion therapy, right? Like, yes, shame is certainly what brings people in, but they're not ashamed of themselves if they didn't have this understanding of sin. And of course, sin and hell are inextricably connected because the one leads to the other. Unless you have, Jesus' sanctifying sort of, or you accept Jesus, as your savior. So I think that those are two big things. And again, I brought it up a few minutes ago, but I think maybe this is the time to talk about it. The idea of agency, like, what does it mean to make a choice to go into conversion therapy? What does it mean to make a choice as an evangelical, to be honest, even more broadly? Because within this religious system, a lot of your decisions are made for you. Right? You choose this or this, right, wrong, good, evil, of the enemy, of God. It's this binary understanding of everything, male, female, man, woman, blah, blah, blah. All of these sorts of constructions of the world force you to make a choice. And of course, within the evangelical imagination, emphasis, of course, on imagination, there's always one right answer. There's always one right or wrong answer, right? It's so clear. Everything's so, organized and neat. And I think that for obviously homosexuality versus heterosexuality, of course, the decision is made for you. You cannot be one. And so you have to choose the other. But again, this idea of choice is so, again, it's constrained, it's circumscribed, it's determined in so many ways for you. And so when you're told that either you choose yourself and just live authentically, or you choose God and reject, the sinful part of you, again, is that really a choice? Yes, in a lot of ways it is. But when you're in a context, whether it be a family, a university like Liberty, a church community, whatever, when you're at a small town, right? When you're in these contexts, so many of your decisions are made for you in so many ways. Again, not to absolve people and say, well, they didn't have a decision and therefore that's why they did these awful things. No, or why they chose conversion therapy. But when I think about, conversion practices specifically and just zooming in, I think to myself, what does it mean to consent to abuse, right? And conversion therapy is abuse on all levels, spiritual, in a lot of cases, physical, or in many cases, physical, I should say, psychological, emotional, etc. And on top of that, if we are to take seriously what the UN Rapporteur on Torture in 2019 described conversion therapy as, according to their definition, it's torture as well, depending on the context, right? So what does it mean to consent to torture? What does it mean to consent to abuse? I don't think you can. And it's, if you have someone like a person who's in a marriage and they're abused, you would never say, well, you stayed in that marriage, right? Like that's never going to be the thought. But I think in this context, what we have to think about is if we understand conversion therapy for what it is, which is it's abuse, I think that it sort of changes how we understand people's choice, quote unquote, to be in there. They're coerced, they're pushed, they're, in some ways, many ways forced into these practices.
Yeah, and it got me thinking, if we could take off that one horrible understanding of theology, how many other dominoes, and this to me is just one of those like, man, when you have this view of hell, it sets up this kind of abuse. And I wonder how many other kinds of abuse could we line up that are all, affected by that one domino. Okay, another quote that this one, it was like, oh, this kind of caught me off guard, but then I was like, wow, I completely see the point here, and I think you make the point really well in this book. But this was another one that was kind of like caught me off guard. Conversion ideology and practices are genocidal in nature. And you talk about it targets members of this community with the intent to completely destroy queer culture, queer identity, queer expression, and queer social vitality. Attempts to erase queer life operate on a global scale and constitute planned, coordinated, and long-term efforts. Talk to us about how do we reframe this in context of genocide?
Mm-hmm. So this is an idea that is original to my friend Christine Robinson and her partner Sue Speedy. They co-authored this article called Genocidal Intentions. And every time I talk about conversion therapy, I bring this up because I think it's super important to understand it in these terms. So conversion therapy, if we are, again, to sort of name it plainly, these are efforts to completely get rid of, like you said, queer vitality, queer joy, queer love, queer community, queer representation, queerness. It's to get rid of queers. Right? To name it plainly, if these folks could have their way, queers would not exist. I would not exist. My friends would not exist. All of us would be gone. Like there would be no such thing as queerness. And of course, we understand genocide not just in a physical or bodily sense where, it's not just murdering or killing a group of people or attempts to kill a group of people or murder a group of people, but it's also cultural. We can think about, indigenous populations in North America and the decimation of these communities, right? And these groups. And so when we're thinking about conversion therapy, we're thinking about the effort to strip us of our queerness. And, I oftentimes make the comparison because I think it's an apt comparison. If we're thinking about, where someone says, and I still find it wild that today homophobia is still like the last sort of hatred that's like really okay for a lot of people, that it's palatable, where it's like, if someone made a really racist comment, people are like, what the hell? You can't say that. Like, don't say that. And they would sort of, you'd hope that they would address it. Most people, I think, at least in my circles, would. Same with sexist stuff. You would say like, don't say that. Like, what are you talking about? Stop. But homophobia for people who are like, it's like their sincerely held religious belief, it's okay. Like, that's just their belief. And you're like, wait, what? Like, that's okay? Yeah. Like, excuse me? But I think that, there are so many people who, again, it's just sort of like accepted because it's a belief, or it's a religious belief. It's tied to religion. And of course, we know that sexism, racism, these are tied to religious beliefs as well. We can look at like Christian history in the past, since Christianity's been around, and see how women have been subjugated, see how people who are not white have been subjugated, right? And so I think it's wild when people don't understand homophobia and transphobia and the desire to get rid of us as anything less than being motivated by genocidal intention. Right? Like it's an expressed desire that, like I said in the book, it's a global phenomenon. Like it's not just exclusive to the U.S. or Canada or whatever. It's across the world, right? And again, it's accepted that people are like, well, at the end of the day, people should be able to choose. People should be able to, make their decision. And it's like, dear Lord, like, how is this still the conceptualization of this? And I think it's super important to put it in these terms, because when we understand it as one of many, and I think we can all think of many, instances of attempted genocides that are happening right now, right? That when we think about it in these terms, we can understand the stakes. So we can understand that this is not something that should just be winked at or sort of like, oh, that's fine because that's just what they believe. It's like, no, like, again, like if these folks could have their way, I would be gone. And I always think, and I got off track, but I'll bring it back and I'll land the plane in a second, about when people will say things, if people say like, well, I like him, I just don't think it's right that he's gay. Like, what? It's like if I said to a woman, it's like, I really like you, I just don't like that you're a woman. She'd say, so you don't like me? I'd say, no, I just don't like that you're a woman. It's like, no, because she'd say, well, I'm a woman. Like, you understand, like, that's a constitutive part of who I am. And for you to say you just don't like that part of me, well, that influences so many different aspects of my identity, right? In the same way, or in a very similar way at least, one's sexual orientation or one's gender identity or expression, right? That these constitutive parts of who we are, if you're to say, I just don't like that part that you're gay, it doesn't work. The math does not compute, right? Like, it's not possible to say that. And I emphatically reject when anyone says that, right? And I also don't like really have much FaceTime with people who say things like that. They don't really want to talk to me, strangely enough. But I think that at the end of the day, it's sort of this, there's still this like remnant of respectability, if we can call it that, of like homophobia that's like assigned to homophobia. And you're like, dear God, like, how is this still okay? At least in some people's estimations, like, it's just it's bonkers to me.
You're totally right. And, the phrase you're making me think of is the hate the sin, love the sinner. And we can separate those cleanly, and to the person on the receiving end of that, it's like, which part of me is, it comes from this idea that I think conservative straight theology teaches, which is, no, this is just a choice that you made, Lucas. This is, you made a choice and I don't like the choice you made. And I think the person is trying to say that and doesn't in ignorance understand what they're actually communicating to the other person of like, oh, it's not a choice. And it's, you didn't have the option to choose something else. And yeah, that falls apart pretty quickly. Now I want to circle back to something you mentioned this earlier, but this is one of the threads in the book as well. But the whole idea of the weaponization of celibacy in queer Christian contexts, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how does that distort both sexuality and spirituality when we emphasize it only for people in the queer community?
Yeah. So first of all, if we are to look at the Bible, which a lot of evangelicals both strangely know very well in the sense that they can cite a lot of passages, but have a profound lack of understanding when it comes to anything historical, contextual, or interpretive. But putting that aside, that Paul, if we are to go to Paul, our good friend Paul, perhaps one of the main mobilizers of shame within the the Christian tradition, Paul says that, he encourages people, actually, he says that should be the number, that should be the default, is going for celibacy, is to be single. Whereas he says, if you're burning with passion, then, get married so you can have sex is the sub-thesis, or the thesis put differently. So first and foremost, this is not something that even should be offered to everyone as if it's a gift. And I love the idea of celibacy as a gift. Isn't that a gift, right? Isn't that such a present that we're all looking for, right? I always think to myself, I had an ex-boyfriend and he was a terrible person, but putting that aside, and I don't say that about all my exes. I actually I have wonderful exes, but this one in particular, I think it has something to do with his religious upbringing and his parents, and you'll have an idea of what I mean when I say what I say. So his dad, he was, first of all, when he first told him he was gay, he told him, that one of his first questions was, so did you molest those two boys you used to babysit? Which I love that connection. That's always a cute connection, right? And then he said, well, you know what? You could just be celibate. That seems like a really, strong option right now for you. And I remember thinking at the time, what a generous offer. You know what I mean? First, you what's the word? Go at them with, these crazy comparisons or questions that, of course, are just violent in and of themselves. But on top of that, then you offer this really, really cute gift of celibacy. So it's, of course, these days when we think about celibacy, it's oftentimes reserved for queers or who are fighting their, desires, which their internet histories tell a very different story that as to whether or not they're fighting these desires, but that's neither here nor there, and who am I to say? So what I will say is that, it's oftentimes reserved for queers that, again, and it's framed as this really generous gift. And it's just, again, I think that again, as an option, I think to myself, it's oftentimes you just reverse it on straight folks. You're just do you want to be straight? Does that sound fun to you? Do you think that would be a fulfilling life? Again, we're talking about a very natural biological function if we're talking just about sex. And of course, sexuality is not to do with just sex, but certainly connected. It's in the name. I think to myself, dear God, what a wild offer. But it is, it's, I think that there's so many parts of evangelicalism that present themselves as compassionate or loving, even conversion practices, right? This is framed as a compassionate, loving endeavor, that what they're doing is for the good of the individual in large part so they don't go to hell. But on top of that, they're going to find a way to sort of live with this. But I think that speaks so clearly, just like this offer of celibacy, to the inverted morality of this religious tradition, right? That what is good is for everyone else bad. For what is bad is considered something to be celebrated, celibacy. You know what I mean? These are things that I just find just wild. And I think it took me so long for me to understand all of this once I got out of this system and really had that sort of critical time and space apart from it, that you just realize how twisted this entire sort of theology is. And again, it's this inversion of morality. It's this inversion of ethics. It's this inversion of the good life. And I just think to myself, the things that are offered as if these are going to be life-giving are clearly death-dealing. These are things that I don't want anything to do with, and I don't think any of them would want anything to do with if they were presented the option. And I think that, this is just one of many examples of how evangelicals are like an upside down opposite land.
I never hear celibacy suggested in straight contexts. So it's not like, well, this is one tool we have and we recommend this for everybody. I would just say, like, as someone who's been in the church for decades, I've grown up in it. Like, it's never used like that. That's not how celibacy is used. It's always the wild card. Oh, you're queer. Well, guess what? Here's how we can fix you and get you settled. But if it was the gift that we say it is, then we should be offering it to every teenager, regardless of their sex. Say, hey, celibacy is really a gift. You should, consider that. And we would think that's funny. We're like, no, we're teaching them, like, go find your soulmate, and as long as it's of the opposite sex. And so I think that it's just, I would just caution us as Christians, especially if you're straight, like, please don't think about celibacy as a gift only for one part of the community. If it's a gift, it's got to be a gift for everybody. And if it's not a gift you want, then it's probably not a gift they want either. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just saying. Okay, one more quote. I love this. You say, one survey indicated that the top-cited way that survivors have been able to come to terms with the effects of conversion practices was through supportive friendships with affirming individuals, regardless of their identities. How can we, regardless of our identity, how can we be part of contributing something healing and ultimately life-giving for people who have either gone through conversion therapy or are at risk of someone trying to get them to go down that road?
Yeah, I think, and both, I think the way to cover all of those bases is to say, like, queers in general, right? Like, there are people who haven't gone through conversion therapy, but they're at risk potentially. And, like, queer affirming practices, like, it's, I think some people make it really difficult in their minds, or like sort of like think like, oh gosh, how am I going to talk to this queer person? It's like what do you think you're supposed to talk? Like, talk to us like we're a normal person, because we are normal people, and you could just talk to us like that. So I think that for me, I think there are a few things. One, like, talking to us, like having conversations, including us in conversations and decisions. And if we're talking in like an ecclesial context, like a church context, then, using affirming language. Like, I still to this day, it's one of my favorite things that anyone's done. It wasn't in a church. It was in a tutorial, actually. I was in divinity school, not at Liberty. And I was there, and the TA, he would always do this thing where he would be talking about God, and sometimes he'd say he, sometimes he'd say she, and sometimes he'd say they, without any sort of qualification and without skipping a beat. It was just like talking like, yeah, God, blah, 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 she said. And I was like, and you're sitting there, and as like a somewhat deconstructing or beginning to deconstruct person, it was still sort of like this wild radical moment where I was like, oh my gosh, like, did I just hear that correctly? And like, I sort of like looked around the room, and like no one else was fazed. I'm like the only like Exvangelical in the room. So clearly no one else cared. But I was like, wow. So I think that, using language that's affirming, also having conversations with us, right? So for those who have undergone conversion practices, to listen, simply just listening, like, and not necessarily offering your opinion. I think so often people, and this is for everyone and anyone in the world, we try to go for what's the solution. And half the time, people who are telling you stories or telling you, like, showing you their scars, they're not asking for you to tell them what to do. They're literally just asking for you to listen and affirm them, right? And I think that oftentimes what happens in the re-traumatization process is when people don't listen, and when people negate their experience or say, like, that didn't happen, or it mustn't have been that bad, or whatever. I still love it when I tell them I went to Liberty, they're like, oh, it mustn't have been completely terrible. And I'm like, what? Like, that's your first thing to say to me? Like, first of all, it's true. Like, it wasn't completely terrible. Yeah, I made friends, and I have, some friends to this day. But that's the first thing. Like, oh, it mustn't have been awful. And you're like, what? Are you trying to like what's the word? Like, find a silver lining for me? Are you trying to like redeem my experience? Like, get the hell out of here. But that's one thing. So like, not to tell them anything other than that I love you. And even that statement, I think that sometimes we have that statement, but I still love you. And you're like, what? Like, we didn't need to add the, but I still, like, you could just say, I love you. It's always a wild thing. And people are like, I just don't know how to talk. I'm like, just, again, how would you talk to anyone else? Talk to us like that. And so I think that, like, again, listening is a huge thing. Engaging in conversation, engaging people in conversations and bringing them into decisions and conversations, I think, are huge. And also having like very directed, like, activities, whether they be like a sermon series or, have a Bible study or like a book, like, book club or whatever about queerness, right? Like, actually, like, have some sort of representation, have some sort of conversation. And I think what's even more like, it could be even more fascinating is like to actually have those folks lead these things as opposed to the straight person leading it, right? Strangely enough, queers have a little bit of life experience that can allow them to facilitate these conversations. So I think these are things that are awesome ways to make folks who have undergone conversion practices or are at risk of undergoing conversion practices or just queer in general. If you want to have queers in your congregation, which I hope you do, you have to actually like engage these folks. And if they're not engaged, well, they're going to go somewhere else, right? And for good reason, right? I wouldn't want to go. I don't go to church anymore. But if I were going to church and my church was completely silent about gender and sexuality, I'd be like, then I'm out of here. Like, no, thank you. Like, no chance in hell am I going to stick around, right? So I think those are ways of navigating these waters.
Love it. There's so much to this book that I really appreciate. And I think you have offered a gift, not only in allowing all the voices that you compiled, and you even mentioned there could be dozens more that could have made it to the book, but allowing each of those stories to be told and honoring that experience. But then the gift for straight people to have a little bit of an insight of like, holy cow, we had no idea, is so powerful. And, it may not be the book that changes the Supreme Court or any law, but it's bringing beauty into the world and it's bringing healing into the world. And that's, when the world feels heavy these days, that's like all I just like go back to of like, what can I do today to bring some beauty into it? Because it just feels like so much ugliness, so much hate, so much of all that. But like we each get a chance to do something, to do our part, to bring something. And I think you are bringing beauty into the world. And I would highly recommend people who are listening to this, check this book out. There's something that it's a conversation we need to have. And I'm very grateful you did that. Now I'm going to transition us. Okay. So now I want to ask you some questions that I ask everybody, and we get to compare your answers to everybody else's. You ready?
Okay. I'm ready.
You may need a sip of wine for this. All right. So we'll start on a wine question. I know you're not a wino, admittedly, you've said that, but I'm curious. I don't think that's your first glass of wine you've ever had in your life. Have you ever had a really good glass of wine, a really good experience? If I said, hey, Lucas, like what was like the best wine you've ever had? Is there a memory that comes to mind? Is there a poem involved in it? I mean, come on, tell us what happened.
You would almost think that I was drunk when I wrote that poem.
Except you were at Liberty, and I know there's no way you're getting alcohol in there.
Well, you know what? There were a few moments in my junior and senior year, but we'll put a
wow, there you go. You really were living on the edge.
Naughty boy at the time. Yeah, I never got caught. That was the good thing. Like I did a lot of things that I absolutely shouldn't have done according to their, student code of conduct, sure. But I never got caught. Anywho, the best experience of wine or the best experience associated with the wine?
Sure. So if I said like, hey, what's the best glass of wine you've ever had? Do you think about a particular bottle? Is it who you were with? Is it where you were? Is it a conversation you had? Like what's the story there?
So this is something I also don't talk about typically, but we're on our second glass. Here we go. So I'm a rosé boy. I'm like a cheap date for a cheap rosé, to be honest. I don't need it to be expensive. And I typically what I do is in the summers, there's a clothing optional beach in Toronto, my favorite place in the entire city. You can understand why. And so I go with, my friends or whatever, but I always bring, at least if I'm not doing wine coolers, which again, like so gay, but if I'm not doing wine coolers, I'm doing rosé, which again, like big old homosexual. And so I'll bring like a bottle to 2 bottles depending for the day, and then just, have a clothing optional time. Yeah, it's kind of the best. And if you ever come to Toronto, Jeremy, I'm going to drag you to Hanlon's Point. And you do have a decision. I was going to say you have no choice in the matter, but it's like, no, like that absolutely goes against like fundamental values I hold. So you have the option, but
agency is important, Lucas. We've already talked about this.
Consent, my friend. Come on. So
that is, I've never had that story shared before. So you're the first on the podcast to share about a clothing optional rosé bottle on the beach. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay. Which member of church history would you trust to pick out a bottle of wine for you, and who would you not trust and why?
Church history. Who would I choose? You know what? Like, who would I rather have a bottle of wine with? Is maybe the way I'm going to approach the question, and then I'll answer the question. Like, would I rather like Jesus or MLK? Probably MLK at this point. I know who for sure I wouldn't want to have a bottle of wine with. That's Martin Luther. Like that. There's Martin Luther King Jr. and then there's Martin Luther. Let's go with that. That seems like a fun connection, even if just by way of name. Martin Luther, like that crazy man. Like he said a lot of horrible things, and even about his wife. Like he talked about her in like the most unpleasant terms of how ugly she was. I don't know what he would say about me, so I wouldn't want to share a bottle of wine with him. He talked about Jews really poorly, especially in his later years. In the early years, he was done with hanging out with Jews, but then once we get to On the Jews and Their Lies, the treatise that he wrote, strangely enough, he wasn't a fan. And so I would say him. Like I'd rather like he'd probably like drink like a bottle of vinegar over like a bottle of wine. That weirdo. So Martin Luther, I'm going to say nay, and who I'm going to say yay to is MLK. I think that, church history, obviously extends into the present. And so I think that, it's not so distant history, but certainly history that I'm super fascinated with and inspired by. So I would say MLK.
What do you think MLK would have you drink? What's he picking out?
He would share my interest in rosé. I don't think
would it be a rosé?
No, absolutely not. I'm just like speaking like what I want him to love. No, I would say he'd love rosé, but he wouldn't love Hanlon's Point Beach. Maybe that would
probably be too much for him.
Yeah, but like maybe he's full of surprise. He's actually not full of surprises, but maybe you never know, right?
All right, we'll move on. What is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
Jeremy, do we need to answer this question? After all of what we've just gone through, that I'm a good poet.
You get to pick one.
Yeah, we'll put the poet thing aside. We'll put the straight thing aside. What did I used to believe that I no longer believe or was wrong about?
That it turned out later you were wrong about.
Oh, I see. Okay, it turned out that I was wrong. You know what?
We got one good.
This is something. This is a day of first that I'm telling things that I absolutely shouldn't tell this, but it's going to completely jeopardize my reputation. But I think it's fine. Honest to God, up until about last year, maybe the year before, I don't remember when, I thought that eggs, like when a chicken lays an egg, this is going to speak to like my biology education or my education in biology. I thought that when a chicken laid an egg, it would turn into a chicken if like a hen sat on it. But if the hen didn't sit on the chicken egg, it wouldn't turn into a chicken. And that's why people would pick chicken eggs out of like the coop, because if you took it out of the coop, well, the mom couldn't sit on it. And so I legitimately thought that they like the yolk inside became a chicken if there was enough heat involved to kind of cover the egg. And that I honest to God believe that that's how chickens came about. I shouldn't have said this. Now I should be like, redact that, change that.
No, I'm actually, now you've got me wondering, because I would probably have guessed the same thing.
Well,
so
I didn't understand. Like,
how does
apparently,
it work then?
it needs to be fertilized by a male chicken.
A rooster.
There we go. Oh my gosh. Language is not my thing. Yeah, I think that it has to be fertilized. So when you have a chicken that hatches, it's because it was fertilized. But again, I don't know what I thought. I just never questioned it. Like it just was never on my radar to think, how does a chicken hatch? Like I wasn't raised on a farm. Like I didn't.
Yeah, I'm with you,
eggs,
man.
Sure, but you know what I mean?
I've never chicken either. I'm with you.
And I don't think that we should feel ashamed, actually, based on you agreeing with me.
Yeah, you were like bringing shame to that, and I was trying to like come alongside you and say like, I don't know the difference either. Like I've never raised a chicken, and I'm sure our listeners are going to be like, that's obvious, but you probably had a chicken if you did. For us non-chicken folks.
Yeah. I hope anyone who's listening to this just reaches out to affirm us that they too thought that it was the difference between a hen sitting on the egg or not. It's also like
an expert with chickens. Please let us know how to navigate this conversation.
This was like, and actually I did learn this at Liberty. One of the few things I learned was that north and up are not the same thing. I always thought that when I said I'm going north, I was going like sort of synonymous terms, but they're not. So that's maybe a less embarrassing confession, but I think they're in some ways connected.
Oh, I love it. Very nice. All right. Well, you can take this next question, obviously a variety of angles. So we'll see where you want to go with it. What do you see as the main issue facing Christianity in America today, from your vantage point?
I think that the majority of conservative religious tradition, conservative Christian traditions, again, Pentecostals, evangelicals, white Christian fundamentalists, and to loop all of them together, I would just say, I guess maybe the term I would use is white Christian nationalism or white Christian nationalists. I would say that's the problem, is this conflation of country and whiteness and Christianity that is really at its core, in my understanding, as a grab for and maintenance of power. That I think that, and maybe all religion really is sort of like in a Foucauldian lens, like, or a Foucauldian way, like an effort to exercise power in some way, shape, or form. But I think that from my understanding of a lot of the conservative Christians, again, the white Christian nationalists, this is the goal. No longer are Jesus's teachings the goal, and maybe they never were for a lot of these denominations, but maybe they were. I don't know. I wasn't around, more than 34 years ago. But I think that white Christian nationalism is the biggest issue, and I think what's motivating that is the desire, like the thirst for power.
Yep, that's good. What is something that's blowing your mind right now?
Oh goodness, I'm trying to think. I said it once, but it's not really new. But there are these grapes that I've been eating recently that not turned into wine. They're quite good, but that's like a terrible answer. Sorry, I'm so sorry to disappoint. What else is new? No, I'm trying to think like what these grapes. You wouldn't believe.
Look, I gotta tell you about these grapes, guys.
What's blowing my mind?
Come on,
you know
Mr. I live in academia. What crazy idea, crazy book you've read?
Oh, you know what? I'm working on a few projects that I'll tell you about later, and this is not. I can't talk about it publicly, but there are some things that are actually like crazy that I think a lot of people. Anyway, that's for later. But what I will say, the effects of creatine, Jeremy. I sort of. I'm a simple-minded man. I was always sort of like a very average. I had a very average body. I always describe it as a potato body. And other than when I was at Liberty and a few times after that, there was one time actually, this to give you an idea or a story. One time I went on spring break. It was senior year, and I came back from spring break, and I went to Disney in Florida, which was like my first mistake. But I come back to Lynchburg, and I said to my friend Ben, or he said like, "Oh, what'd you do for spring break?" I said, "Oh, I did this, and this." I said, "What about you?" He said, "Well, David, who was a mutual friend of ours at the time, he said, David and I looked at pictures of you on Facebook and saw how fat you got." Wow. They call that Christian love. And so there's no love like Christian love, right? No, so I just never exercised. And then once I finished the PhD, my thing was I was going to get, one of my goals when I finished the PhD was that I was going to start working out. So I did, and there was like, marginal effects. And then I started with creatine, and I feel like a new girl. I just talk about a transformation. I feel just fabulous. Creatine.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. What kind of creatine are you taking? What are these gummies? This powder? What are you doing? You gotta let us know.
It is powder. There are gummies that are like green apple flavored. I'm not a fan, so that's sort of a dead end. But
that would be alley. I'm surprised.
A lot of things are up my alley, Jeremy. Jeez Louise, you're making it's just softball pitches here. What'd you call me? No. So I think that the creatine, I just down the hatchet. It's just disgusting, and everyone who sees it
straight creatine.
Yeah, like that, and then I just chug some water, and it like dries my throat out like a desert. But nonetheless, it's how I do it. But honestly, like I've never felt like what's the word? I never felt like I had like a body, and now I'm like, does she have a body? Yada yada. I think she might, or she's at least on her way, and so I'm quite excited about it. It is blowing my mind. And again, I'm a simple-minded boy. Like very simple things excite me. And so, yeah, that's what I would say for that answer.
I'm excited for you. That's great.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
great. What is a problem that you're trying to solve?
Goodness gracious. A problem I'm trying to solve. I guess at every time you're doing any research, you're trying to solve some sort of problem, even if it's just an intellectual problem. I guess I'll make this into a shameless plug. How about that? So the project I'm currently working on is an edited collection of stories similar to the stories or in the same format as Shame-Sex Attraction. But this one's about queer experiences at Christian colleges, universities, and seminaries. And so up until this point, there hasn't really been there have not been many representations of queer experiences at Christian colleges and universities and seminaries. There have been, of course, and there are a number that I suppose I could name, but there's never been an edited collection about it. So that centers on this topic. And so that one, I'm trying to solve the problem of a lack of representation, Jeremy.
Okay, that might carry over. My next question is, what's something you're excited about right now? And you seem pretty excited about that. Or do you want to be excited about something different?
Oh boy, what am I excited about? Goodness, what am I excited
It'd be
about?
hard to top your creatine excitement right now, to be honest.
There's very little in this world that could, match that. What am I excited about? Oh boy. I'm excited for beach season. I'm excited for that.
So
again,
creatine. Yeah.
Yeah. And the question is, like, when he goes to the clothing optional beach, is he wearing a Speedo or is he wearing trunks? That's, of course, the logical question. I'll leave it to the imagination, Jeremy.
But there is rosé.
I just messed up your name. There is rosé. Yeah, I called you Jeremy. Apparently the wine is, here we are. Queer we are. Beer we are. No, it's wine, Jeremy. Yeah. So the beach season. I'm very excited. And I'm excited for you to join. I can't wait. It's going to be a good time.
We gotta find a way to get me up there. I gotta find some church that needs a speaker or something.
Done.
Let's see. Is there anything you want to add? I hesitate to ask this. Is there anything you want to add that I may not have asked you about that we cannot close the books on this conversation without addressing?
Ooh.
Why did we not get to that? Let's talk about that.
You know what? That question, or like variations thereof, I typically, that's when I plug the book, but I didn't have anything for the last 2 questions ago, and so here we are now. Oh boy! What did we not talk about? Oh gosh, I feel like this would be the moment to insert a joke about pop culture, but I'm so poorly informed. I live in like the most sheltered bubble of my research. Like, I read newspapers from like the 1990s all the time. Like, I'm not reading current stuff. You know what I mean? Like, that's my reading. And today I was reading, anyway, it doesn't even matter. So, what was the question? Jeez Louise.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that I may not have asked you about?
Well, Jeremy, yes,
no.
I am going. Well, I was going to say I am going to the gym after this. So if that's what you were wondering, then the answer is yes.
Already had your creatine, or is that after this?
No, I forgot. Well, apparently I'm so excited about creatine that I forgot to take it today. So that'll have to be afterwards. Yeah. A mess, just a pure mess.
Hey, this has been a delight. If someone is listening to this and they're like, I like this guy, I want to connect with more of their work, how can people find you online?
So you can find me on Instagram at Luke Slam Dunk Wilson. You can find me on Threads at Luke Slam Dunk Wilson. Pardon. Oh boy, I am not a lightweight, but my word, this is absurd. So same with. I never thought of. I'm getting sweaty. So you can't tell from my blurry camera. Jeez Louise, look at the quality of this thing. My word, what is this, 1999? So what else? What else am I on? Blue Sky at Luke Slam Dunk Wilson. I'm on Insta. We already covered that. I'm on. Jeremy, cut the camera, cut the microphone. Oh my God. And then X or Twitter, whatever it's called these days, Wilson_FW. And then, Lucas Wilson on LinkedIn, Luke Wilson on Facebook, and then also on academia.edu. Should you be so inclined to read my academic work that all of 12 people have read. Yeah.
What's the slam dunk thing? What's that from?
Well, no. So Luke Slam Dunk Wilson came about from high school, this high school conversation. This one gal, she was just talking about who knows what. And she said, like, your name's like, she was talking to someone else, and I just clocked it. And I was like, that's for later. She said, like, your name's like, I don't know, like Michaela Slam Dunk Jerusi. And I was like, that's hilarious. And like me being like possibly the worst at like sports in general, but particularly basketball. I'm only good at volleyball. And apparently that's a gay sport, according to a number of people's sort of like understandings of the sport, which I didn't know until years ago, or until recently, should I say, sorry, which I just find hilarious because I'm like, again, like the proof's in the pudding. But yeah, I'm not very good at sports, and particularly not basketball. So I thought it was kind of silly, kind of funny, and I thought let's name that and claim that.
Well, I just gotta say, this has been a delightful conversation. I think we're friends now, so I don't know if you are okay with that, but this. To talk about something as heavy as we have talked about and the amount of laughter involved, that's a pleasant surprise. You know, I thought this one could be a little heavy, and we have navigated it, and you have brought so much grace and charm and humor, and I appreciate that. So thank you for not only having the courage to share your story and share so many other stories of people that are rallying behind you, but thanks for taking the time today to share it with us. We really appreciate it.
Jeremy, right back at you. This has been a treat. Honestly.
Awesome. All right, everybody, go check out. I was like, if I don't say this right, shame, sex, attraction. That is a tricky one to say. Shame, sex, attraction. It will be worth your time, and you can support a great guy in the process. We'll see you on the next episode of Cabernet and Pray.